So I decided to go against all my gut feelings, and I watched Alien Romulus, which is so far the last movie of this franchise. And I say that I went against my gut feelings because I kinda knew that I wouldn't enjoy it, but more on that later. So my first contact with the Alien franchise was around the time they announced Prometheus. Um, so it was like pure coincidence because I didn't know that Prometheus was a part of the Alien franchise. They just announced it, and out of nowhere, I decided to check on these old movies that I always heard people talking about. So, just to give a little bit of background, the first Alien movie we follow Ripley and the main protagonist and some other minors because they detect a signal which could indicate intelligent life outside of Earth. And as part of their contract with the company, they need to investigate it. So they go after the signal, and it turns out that it was a distress signal telling them to not go there. But they didn't know that at the time, and they get attacked. One of them got attacked by the facehugger and gets infected by the Xenomorph, and then the rest of the movie is just the remaining crew members trying to survive. And there is like an android subplot because in this ship there is like 5 humans and 1 android that was planted by the company to make sure that the employees would investigate those signals. So the android is in there because the main goal of the company is not to mine asteroids, is to find the Xenomorph. And the android was there to make sure that the Xenomorph gets to Earth intact. So the company, I believe it's Wayland company, gets to study and possibly turn the Xenomorph into a weapon. So that's like the main plot of the first one. For the second movie, they decide to go on a totally different direction. So now instead of being an horror movie, it's more like action based. So it's not one Xenomorph. We have like millions of them. The protagonists are not clueless miners. They are military. They are, I forgot the word, but they are from the army. Marines, that's the word. So they have these big guns they can use to fight back against these xenomorphs. And we have an evolution on the android subplot. The main protagonist is still Ripley, and now we have Bishop as the android of this movie. But since Ripley just got out of a situation with an like evil android, she does not know if she can trust on Bishop, and we the audience also don't know if we can trust on him. The movie goes on, and right at the end, Bishop does something that ends up saving the main cast. I believe he dies at that time. So yeah, but now we as the audience know that the androids can change. They are not made all to obey the company. Some of them have like kind of a free will. So that's the second movie. On the third one, we get to a prison, and they kind of go back to the horror vibes of the first movie. But they show the Xenomorph a little bit more because we already have we already gave good looks at the Xenomorph. Like we saw him on the previous movie, so there is there is not much reason to keep him in shadows again. And now, since we are on a prison, we have that feeling that maybe no one will show up to save the cast because it's all criminals. I believe that's like the movie that I least enjoy of the original 4 ones, but it sets the ground for the next one, because on the third movie there is a scene where the Xenomorph decides not to attack Ripley, and at the end of the movie it gets revealed that Ripley is infected by a Xenomorph, and then she decides to sacrifice herself so she can save the rest of the cast, because she kills herself, and in the process she takes the Xenomorph inside of her with her. So on the fourth one, I would say it's kind of a middle ground between the first and the second movie. It's like it's not only one Xenomorph, but it's not millions of them. It's the main cast is also not clueless about them, because Ripley is in there, and she can like guide them to how to fight back against the Xenomorphs. We have again another evolution of the android subplot, which is like kind of my favorite element on the old movies, because on each movie we see like an evolution of the androids. So the first one is like this android that can only follow the company rules. On the second, there is an android with kind of a free will, but we are not so sure about that. And on the fourth movie, we discover that the androids fought back for equal rights, and now they live among humans. So yeah, that's pretty cool, but that's not like the main theme of the movie. In this movie, we discover that the Wayland company is trying to recreate Ripley's DNA, and the Ripley we see in this movie is a clone herself. So they are trying to like recreate her, so they can recreate the Xenomorph inside of her. And at the end of the movie, they achieved that goal, but not the way they wanted, because they wanted to have a alien queen, which would give birth to millions of other aliens. But since the Xenomorph DNA was mixed with Ripley's DNA, they get a queen, but they get a queen that have the human reproductionary system. So the queen gives birth to only one alien, which Ripley ends up killing at the end of the movie. So it's quite interesting. And we also get to see the other clones, which is all fucked up. But yeah, And then we get to Prometheus, which I didn't watch it since like until like 3 years after it got released. So they announced this movie, and then out of nowhere, I decided to watch the old ones without even knowing that Prometheus was a part of the franchise. And then Prometheus got released, and I didn't watch it until like 3 years later. Um, when the movie got released, there was like a bunch of reviews popping saying how bad this movie was. I think I even watched some of those, but any of them mentioned that it was an alien movie. So I'm really good at dodging spoilers. But yeah, 3 years later, like around 3 years after the release of this movie, I remembered about it, and like I remember, oh, there is this movie, this sci-fi movie, where a bunch of people were talking trash about it. So why not give it a try and see if it is that bad? And I don't know if I already said that in another video, but low expectations is key for you enjoying something. So for like 3 years, I got bombarded by videos talking about how bad Prometheus is. And when I finally watched it, I was not expecting anything of that movie. And I got surprised and kind of enjoyed it. So one thing that I really saw on every review was people talking about how dumb the characters are. Well, let me go back a little bit. In this movie, we follow a group of scientists try to understand from where we came from. So they track our origin to this planet, and they send a ship to the planet to try to find our creator, the species that created us. And as the movie goes, we find out that the engineers created us, but for whatever reason, they regretted it, and then they decided that they needed to kill us. So they started working on the Xenomorph project, and they would like drop the facehuggers' eggs on Earth to eliminate us all. And that's like the plot of the movie. The scientists got sent to this planet, and in there they discover the engineers created us, but regretted, and they still want to kill us. There is a scene where one of the engineers appear, but the main cast fights back and end up killing it. And at the end of the movie, they try to kind of give a direction for the next movie, because at the end of Prometheus, the main protagonist, she is speaking on a recording, like saying that she will go after the engineers because she wants to know why they regretted creating us, and so she will go after them in their home planet. And that's like Prometheus, very summarized. But yeah, on some of the reviews, as I mentioned, people were criticizing the scientists being really dumb, but that didn't bother me that much because it's an horror movie. We need characters to be dumb. Um, like we go back to the original Alien. One guy gets attacked by the facehugger, and then Ripley tries to get him to quarantine, but then the rest of the crew ends up voting against it. And instead of sending him to quarantine, they bring him inside the ship. And then the Xenomorph bursts out of his chest, and we have the movie. Or characters being down just don't bother me that much. And even when the engineer appeared, because we first see the engineer inside the cocoon, I believe that's the word. And this cocoon appears on the first Alien, but since there was such an years gap between me watching the original Aliens and Prometheus, I just didn't even notice that, and I only realized Prometheus was a part of the Alien franchise at the post-credit scene where a Xenomorph burst out of the engineer's chest. So yeah, even watching the movie, I was kind of slow to see that it's part of the same franchise. And then we get to Covenant, which is the first movie that I was really hyped to watch. So like the first ones, I didn't know what to expect. I just knew that a lot of people enjoyed those movies, but there was still a chance that it wouldn't be for me. So I didn't had much expectations for it. And the same goes to Prometheus. At the time, I would say it was even like the opposite. I had low expectations for it because of the reviews saying how bad this movie was. So I watched it and I ended up really liking it, which raised my expectations to Covenant. So for Covenant, what I was expecting was to see the engineers and to discover what went wrong, like why they created us and then decided to kill us, because that's what the end of Prometheus sets us to. In the end of Prometheus, as I said, the main characters have the goal to go after the engineers. And then I went to Covenant and they just kill every engineer in one scene without explaining us anything. Like at the end of Prometheus, the only survivors is the main protagonist that I don't remember the name right now, and David, the android of that movie, which is very similar to the android of the first Alien. He just fully obeys the company, and David only have his head left because his body gets destroyed. And then on Covenant, he just appears out of nowhere with a fully functional body, and they don't explain that. They also don't explain what happened to the main protagonist of Prometheus, because in this movie we just see her body, and they just say, "Oh, she died." Yeah, what a shame. So yeah, I didn't enjoy much of Covenant because of that. I was expecting to see more of the engineers because I like that type of stories. I like stories that try to explain from where we came. And that was the direction that Prometheus was going at the end. But then they just decide to throw away the engineer plot, and they establish the Xenomorph as the main villain again. And they kind of go back to the first Alien movie, with a main cast that have no clue what the Xenomorph is. There is an evil android with them, and that's it. They need to survive. At the end of that movie, there is something interesting, which is David, he manages to get a facehugger egg, and he hides it on like this colony ship. At least I believe it's a colony ship. It's like a ship with a bunch of humans inside, and the ship is going to a planet where they will establish a new colony. And David gets the facehug eggs and hides on that ship. So that was kind of interesting. But it's just like a brief scene at the end of the movie, just to kind of set up the next one. And then we have the next one, which is Romulus. And as I said, I had a feeling that I would not enjoy it because of what they did in Covenant. Like, I was expecting to see the engineers, and they changed the story and went back to the Xenomorph. So to Romulus, there was very little chance of we going back to the engineers, because like every engineer is dead already. David killed them on the previous movie. But sure, I decided to give it a chance. And there was some things that kind of bothered me. Mainly was the, well, not mainly, but there was this big problem to me, which is teenage heroes. And I'll put the blame on that on Stranger Things for giving us back the child and teenager heroes. So the main cast is just a bunch of teenagers that are trying to escape from the mining planet they are trapped in because of the contract with the Wayland company. So they detect a ship flying above them, where they can enter and like hijack the ship and leave that planet, leave to somewhere else where they can have a normal life. And there is a lot of arguing between the main cast, like a lot of arguing that don't advance the plot to nowhere. It's like there is the main protagonist, and she starts arguing with the rest of the group because she does not think that it's a great idea to hijack the ship. But then, like 2 minutes after, she just goes back and decides, nah, let's go. Let's do this. Let's hijack the ship and go to another planet. What could go wrong? And it's like, why to put the arguing scene? Why to waste 5 minutes of the characters just arguing with each other if everyone would agree with the plan? But yeah, so they get to this ship. There is facehugger eggs. One of them gets attacked. A Xenomorph bursts out of his chest, and then it's just the main cast trying to survive. There is also an android in this movie, and since this movie takes place before the first Alien, this android also have to follow the company rules. So he discovered the Xenomorph, and now we have to protect this organism at all cost, so the company can study it. So yeah, it's kind of the first Alien, but with teenagers. um, there is an auto-aim gun, which I found really funny when I was watching that movie, because it feels like the director have kids, and those kids were just complaining about people using cheats on multiplayer games. Like, it sounds like the director's kids um, were just saying, "Oh, this guy is cheating on the game. He have an auto aim hack." And then the director just heard that and thought it was a great idea and decided to put in the movie. So it was really funny. um, so what's gonna happen in the next movie? We'll have wall hack. Um, like, there will be something that will let the characters see through walls. Um, so yeah, it was kind of odd. I get that for people that don't have much contact with video games, it's an interesting concept. Like, you point the gun to a general direction, and the gun will auto aim, like it will correct your aim, and then you just need to press the trigger, and the gun will like cycle between your targets. So it's an interesting idea, but for people that like played shooters, multiplayer shooters, it feels kind of strange to see like, well, it's just the idea of hacks on those games. It's just that. So yeah, but at the end of the movie, we get to what really bothered me, which is the return of the engineers. So we have this pregnant girl, and she gets infected by the Xenomorphs, and then it ends up changing the DNA of her kid, and instead of giving birth to a normal kid, she gives birth to like an engineer-like figure. And that's like when I completely gave up on the movie. So everything that happened so far, I could just I didn't so much problem. Like, sure, I don't like teenager heroes, but yeah, it could work if you do it right. There was the auto aim gun that I mentioned, which is kind of a rip-off of video games, but sure. It's a futuristic society, so why not? But then they showed up the engineer, and I was like, why? Why to do that? So as I perceived, they removed the engineers because of fan pressure. Like, sorry, like they made Prometheus. People went after the director with pitchforks, I believe that's the word, and torches, because they hated that movie. And then for the next one, the studio decided to go on a completely different direction. So forget the engineers. The Xenomorph is the main villain again. And then we get to Romulus, where at the very end of the movie they say, "Hey, you remember that idea we threw away? Yeah, imagine if we brought them back." And that's what they do. It's like, why? You tried that, the fans didn't like it, and you decided to bend to their will, and you just threw away the idea. So why to bring it back again? Like, just move on, or in this case, move back, because they went back to the Xenomorph being the main villain. So that really bothered me, because I enjoyed the engineer plot, and I wanted to see more of that. But because of like fan pressure, they just decided to not risk anything different, even though this franchise, is like made of different movies with different ideas. So if we go back to every movie, we have like the first Alien, which is more like horror. We have one Xenomorph, and we don't see much of it. To the next movie, they change it to multiple Xenomorphs, and now the main cast is Marine, so they have a way of fighting back. And then we have the third one, which tries to go back to the horror, but there is no reason for them to keep the Xenomorph in shadows, because we already saw it from multiple angles because of the previous movie. So the Xenomorph does not stay much in shadows, and it sets ground for the next one, which is kind of a mix between the first and the second movie. There is not one Xenomorph, but there is also not millions of it. It's not horror, but also is not action. It's more like science fiction. Mostly because of the cloning subplot. And then we have Prometheus, which changes the theme, the general idea of the franchise once more. Like instead of following Ripley and the Xenomorphs, we'll see what happened before it, and we'll see what created the Xenomorph. So every movie so far is like a different idea. Nothing is like the same. And because the fans didn't like it, they just gave up on that, and now I just tried to replicate the first movie, like Covenant. They just gave up on the engineers and went back to a more horror movie, and then they did the same with Romulus. There is no mention of the engineers until the very last minute, and it's just like horror movie with an evil android, just like the first movie. So yeah, kind of a depressing video, because I had high expectations for what would come after Prometheus, but yeah, because of I will attribute it to fan pressure, because that's how I perceived it. The way I saw was that fans complained so much about Prometheus that the studio decided to not risk anymore, even though the whole franchise was made out of risks and every movie was something different. But then they just decided to, let's just go back to the sorry for that. Just exploded everyone's ears. So the studio went like, let's just forget about the engineers and go back to the Xenomorph plot, because that's what the fans want. They want to see the Xenomorph and the generic story that we already told, but with better visuals now. So yeah, I believe that if they release a new Alien movie, I'll just pass it. I shouldn't even have watched Romulus because of what they did in Covenant. Like, I was expecting to see the engineers and they just killed it. But there was no reason for me to watch Romulus outside of just giving a second chance. And then I watched it and they just kept teasing us about the engineer They just kept teasing us about this idea that they already threw away. So like I felt like it was kind of, oh, you like it, the engineer? Have some more of them, but not the real engineer, just this crippled, like skinny engineer that will not present any answers for the questions that we raised in Prometheus. Have fun. So yeah.